All right, thanks, Paul. Morning, everyone. Happy PGP. My name is Mike Orcutt. Like Paul just said, I'm the founding editor of Project Glitch. We're a small team of journalists focused on the future of privacy, identity, and human expression online. We have a newsletter that you should subscribe to, projectglitch.xyz. We also curate event content like the conversation that we are about to have. Stablecoins are a really big topic, obviously. We're going to talk about a specific flavor of stablecoins that don't really exist yet, but all of the technical puzzle pieces to make them exist do exist. The title of this discussion is a technical and legal puzzle. We'll spend the next 30, 40 minutes talking about the pieces of this puzzle. The idea is if they're assembled, they can form a new kind of stable coin that's both confidential and compliant. Like I said, the technical capabilities to do this already exist. Practical zero-knowledge cryptography that was pioneered by Zcash is now the basis of a growing class of privacy tools and protocols that make it possible to prove things about ourselves, like that our names are not on a sanctions list, without revealing any other identifying information. The missing pieces are mostly sort of legal and policy in nature. Some of those don't have anything to do really with privacy. They're more basic things that have to do with trust and accountability that Congress is discussing as we speak. Let's assume that those pieces sort of fall into place. Once they have, what's the best way to give stablecoin payments the same kind of privacy and confidentiality features that businesses have simply come to expect? And do the laws and policies aimed at managing illicit finance need to be updated to account for novel tools like ZK proofs? So before we dive in, that was a kind of a rambling intro. I'm going to introduce our panelists. Paul, do we have Andre? Oh, there he is. Okay, so on screen, we have Andre Omietanski, who's the general counsel at Aztec Labs. And on stage to my immediate right is Sina Kian, former chief legal officer and current advisor to the Aleo Network Foundation, and Leslie Chavkin, global head of policy at Paxos. And so we are going to start with Andre. I'm going to do an around the horn, a little bit more detailed intro to get started. Can you tell us a bit more about your background, sort of what Aztec is and does, and how Aztec has been thinking about confidential stablecoins, Andre?
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully you can hear me all. So my name is Andre. I'm the general counsel of Aztec Labs. My background is less fascinating than my current role. I was a trified lawyer for 10 years, based out of London. So I'm an English qualified lawyer with experience working between London, New York, Paris, and Hong Kong. And in my current role as general counsel of Aztec Labs, my main role is kind of shepherding the team and deploying Aztec. We are developing two things. So just to kind of hit on what Aztec is, Aztec is it will be a fully decentralized programmable privacy protocol on Ethereum as a layer 2. So we're developing Aztec, and we're also developing Noir, which is a open source programming language which enables anybody to write privacy preserving circuits without a PhD in cryptography. So that's not just limited to deploying applications on Aztec, but we see Noir being used in WorldCoin, Starknet, and also in traditional finance. As an open source software developer, our main goal is to kind of create this unique environment where you can create any type of privacy preserving payment architecture. So stablecoins are not the only thing we're focused on. And the genesis of our interest of why we actually started thinking about architecting payments stems back to a digital pound consultation, which we responded to in 2023. The digital pound There was a consultation in the UK whereby the Bank of England put out, some designs for a digital pound, and they requested feedback. We saw massive issues with privacy in the structure of CBDCs, and effectively identified a problem. And I think that problem also applies to stablecoins. The main problem we have seen is, you have a tendency for cash payments, which actually enable privacy, to be disappearing. So according to McKinsey and the World Bank studies, cash usage for payments has dropped globally from 35% in 2019 to around 16% in 2023. In the UK, cash usage fell 45% from 2015 to 14% in 2022, and that's accelerating. On the other hand, you have a decrease in privacy. On the other hand, you have an increase in payments such as CBDCs, which lack any privacy effectively. All bricks are piling to CBDCs. The digital yuan is growing exponentially. Transaction volume has quadrupled since 2023. The ECB will launch a digital euro in October this year. And then in addition, you have stablecoins, which are on the rise. And to quote U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, we are going to keep the U.S. the dominant reserve currency in the world, and we will use stablecoins to do that. So you have this kind of combination of decrease in privacy because of a lack of, not available, ability to use cash anymore, and an increase in digital payment systems such as CBDCs and stablecoins, which unfortunately today don't offer the privacy that people, require. And one example of that is, payroll. You can't really, give employees comfort that their salary won't be known if everything is on Ethereum in its current form, or in any kind of current public system. Employee data will be visible. And then also, people won't be able to set up businesses without fear of being persecuted, because people will know how much is somebody earning. So from our perspective, what we're building on Aztec, and similar to Aleo as well, you can create better privacy preserving systems, and kind of, only make certain data available as and when. So that's kind of the problem that we've identified. And I think some of the systems that we're building will solve that.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Sina, a similar question for you. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background, sort of what Aleo is? I know it's similar to Aztec, but you may have a different framing on this, and sort of why you've thought so much about confidential stablecoins as a use case.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's kind of amazing to follow that lineup of speakers earlier. Just incredible cast. So my name is Sina Kian. I'm an advisor to the Aleo Network Foundation, where I was previously chief legal officer. Before that, I worked in traditional finance. I'm really, really interested in private stablecoins. Aleo is a layer one permissionless blockchain that's fully programmable, and powered by zero knowledge proofs. So just think like Ethereum, but with capacity for privacy. It's launched, it's live, it has Leo, the language, to support it. There are already applications being built on top of it. It's really, really incredible and exciting stuff. One of the most interesting applications, I believe, are private stablecoins, and for a very simple reason. I just think that there is a ceiling on the crypto space and on stablecoins if people's transactions cannot be kept at least somewhat confidential. I just don't see corporates moving to have their entire balance sheets be completely public to the entire world, to their competitors, to everyone. Generally speaking, just to take a very silly example, people who use Venmo, they opt for the private payment, not the public payment. That just gives you some indicia of where consumer demand is, where corporate demand is. So this has to be a product offering of the space in order to remove the current ceiling on the TAM. The good news is the technology is there. And with just a little bit of work on the policy side, I believe this will be unlocked. And before long, I think it will seem kind of silly that there was this time period where we were talking about stablecoins that did not have this kind of protection. Just as when you look back to the early stage of the internet, pre-encryption, pre-HTTPS seems like a little bit of a weird time period that obviously couldn't have lasted very long.
Thanks for that. Leslie, let's go to you. Curious your perspective on all this from where you sit at Paxos, which is a stablecoin issuer, obviously. It's clear why the privacy protocols are sort of excited about this and kind of see it as around the corner. But how does Paxos view sort of confidentiality and privacy? And do you have any thoughts, feedback to what Sina and Andre have said so far?
Thank you so much for having me. So I'm Leslie Chavkin. I'm the global head of public policy for Paxos. If you're not familiar, we're the leading regulated blockchain and tokenization infrastructure platform. You may know us as a stablecoin issuer. We issue a number of US dollar stablecoin products, including PayPal USD, PYUSD. That's a white label stablecoin between Paxos and PayPal. And just by way of background, I spent a long time at the US Department of the Treasury before coming into the industry. I worked on AML CFT and sanctions policy. So I kind of come at this from the perspective of looking at that tension between AML CFT and privacy, which I think has come up a number of times today. So speaking from the perspective of a stablecoin issuer, the way we see it, I think very aligned with the other speakers here on the need for privacy. I think for us in this room, this is a sophisticated audience. We're able to articulate the need for privacy. Once you leave this room, the average consumer probably can't articulate it, but they know what they want, right? They want something similar to cash. In Venmo, they're opting for a private payment when they can, so they know it when they see it. And I think there is even a reasonable expectation of privacy and data privacy, even when you're using an electronic card payment, right? You're not expecting your transaction data to go to a third party. So that exists. As a big issuer, the way we look at it is right now we're still in the stage where we are really trying to drive and accelerate everyday adoption of stablecoins, whether that's by individual consumers, by enterprises that use stablecoins for money movement. That's where our focus is. We look at privacy as sort of the next evolution once there is greater adoption. And I think, as one of my panelists said here, there are the technical solutions in place already. So it's just a matter of building those onto the product once it's really taken off. The second point I would make on that is we are a regulated financial institution. So in the United States, Paxos is regulated by the New York Department of Financial Services. So whenever we think about these privacy solutions, we think about what will our regulators be comfortable, what comports with our regulatory obligations. And I think those solutions are there. Right now, there is some lack of clarity on the regulatory side about what is permissible, what is allowable. So I think there needs to be movement on that side. We hopefully will see it in some of the legislation that's forthcoming, but I think that is a big gray area for industry as well.
Thank you. I'm going to move back to Sina. I think one of the reasons we're talking about this is because the protocols like Aleo and Aztec, if I'm understanding correctly, sort of open the door to a wider range of possible designs in the realm of privacy and compliance. And so I'm wondering if you can take us through at a high level some of the different kinds of designs that are possible in the context of Aleo.
Yeah, I think that's a helpful way to frame it. There's two questions here. There's, can you comply with the laws as they currently exist? And then there's the question of what changes to the laws in light of this technology would be helpful for providing clarity. The answer to the first question is actually yes. And there are a variety of ways you can do it. I'm not saying all of them are good ideas, but there's a variety of ways. So for example, you can implement a whitelist where the only people using the network are permissioned and that they're compliant members. One place where that might, for example, be interesting is if you want to limit availability to accredited investors to comply with an offerings that needs to comply with the securities laws. Then there's the concept of a blacklist. You can actually enforce a blacklist while maintaining privacy through a variety of mechanisms. You could, for example, have a zero knowledge proof based KYC in which you know that the user is not from, for example, a banned jurisdiction, but you don't need to see anything else about that user. So you can actually do it that way. You can also use ZKPs to trace back a transaction to make sure that it never touched a banned transaction without knowing anything else other than the fact that it complies with, for example, a sanctions list. And then finally, this is what I alluded to earlier, you can just have an identity solution that's zero knowledge proof based, where you can authenticate what you need to authenticate about the user without having to see anything else about the transaction or the user's personal information. So think of it as, for example, you go to a venue, they check your ID. Once they see you're 21, they give you an orange bracelet. If you're not 21, you don't have an orange bracelet. Thereafter, nobody needs to ask you your date of birth or see a little plastic rectangle that also has your physical address and other information that's irrelevant to what they need to know. We can build the equivalent of that in the digital space. The technology is already there. And you can protect as much confidentiality as you want and need to comply with the laws as they currently exist without commenting on whether the laws as they currently exist should be the laws in 10 or 15 years.
Can you explain the concept of a view key really quickly? Also, this is not a new concept. It was, I think, pioneered, if I'm not mistaken, by Zcash, and I think is something that's available on Aztec as well. But it seems like an important concept here too.
Yeah, so many amazing things were pioneered by that Zcash team, and I think they deserve a lot of credit. The view keys concept is an amazing one. It's one where you can share view keys with, for example, a compliance team or a trusted third party or anyone you want to, where but only they can see the details of that transaction. And so in the compliance setting, you could imagine, look, the whole world can't see the transaction, right, if you're a corporate, but the view keys can be shared with, for example, a regulator or with a compliance team to ensure that certain attributes are met. That is a significantly less restrictive and more private solution than the status quo, which is broadcasting the entire thing.
I'm going to go back to Andre. Aztec makes the same sort of high-level designs possible as Sina described, correct? And the second part of that is that we discussed a concrete example of using a zero-knowledge proof of certain passport data. I'm wondering if you can run through that example, how that kind of a sanctions check works now, how it could work more confidentially. And any questions that might inspire in the context of current laws?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of second Sina, anything is possible currently on Aleo, and will be possible on Aztec on Ethereum when it is launched. Again, to Leslie's point, as a regulated, for example, regulated financial institution like Paxos, you need to be able to kind of, automate certain checks potentially. So that programmable privacy primitive is possible on Aleo today, and will be possible on Aztec on Ethereum in the future. Meaning, the developers have kind of full control and flexibility to develop and deploy applications in accordance with applicable laws. As to the sanctions check example, I mean, a very, very simple way of complying with the sanctions check today. There's many kind of tools available in the ZK space ecosystem. But for example, you can effectively open up a mobile application, like a proof of passport application on your web browser. You effectively take your passport, which has if you didn't know, it has a kind of a chip inside. Using NFC, the application extracts the relevant information from that chip. For example, your nationality and name, which is relevant for a sanctions check, and it generates a zero-knowledge proof that verifies those specific claims without kind of revealing the personal data. And combined with a smart contract integration, if an app, for example, requires that, if you're using a Paxos stablecoin app and that requires you to verify you're not on any sanctions list, you could use that proof of nationality and name to prove that your nationality is not from a kind of a blacklisted group of nationalities, countries, and your name is actually not on the SDN list as of that time and date, and you can do a kind of recurring check as and when you kind of do a transaction. So that's a very simple way of showcasing how a sanctions check would work in a programmable privacy system. That we've verified this, but as of today, that kind of proof of sanctions, proof of not being sanctions check, that proof itself is valid under Swiss and US laws, as I understand it. There are certain things, and I want to kind of maybe make it a bit spicy, in particular with KYC and data retention under UK law, which may not be possible to just get away with a proof of KYC check, and if you would want to have full privacy, in particular laws in the UK would need to change to just rely on a proof of passport check for KYC AML purposes. But for sanctions, a proof of passport check would suffice.
That's interesting, and I want to dig into a little bit more into the KYC example in a second. But first, I want to go back to Leslie, and I want to take a step back because we're getting kind of these things are exciting and then they're fairly concrete the way that we're describing them, and we've been making the point a few times that the technical puzzle pieces are available. I'm wondering sort of what is coming to your mind in terms of on the legal side, and given your experience with regulators, how would you describe the missing pieces to the extent that there are any? Are there any sort of novel questions that are getting raised in your brain based on some of the things that are being said so far?
Yes, I'll answer that. But one thing that's probably worth noting too, to Sina's point earlier about the tooling being available and evolving very quickly, real time. So we issue our products, some of our products on the Solana blockchain. Solana does have an extension that allows for confidential transfers. So it withholds the amount that you are sending. That's not something that we have enabled on our products, but that kind of tooling is already out there. So just an important point to make. On the question about what is missing, I think it's less, there's certainly a lot of questions on the policy and regulatory side, but I think as an issuer, questions that come to mind around the privacy solutions are around the impact that they would have on things like scaling, transaction costs, on even just whether or not that makes it less user-friendly as a product. So this has been great, and it would be really helpful to hear from Sina and Andre about kind of how they think about those things with their designs.
Sina or Andre, have any response to that?
Yeah, I think one of the amazing things is the same tool that helps with privacy, which is the zero-knowledge proof, actually helps with scaling. Because with Aleo's network, the computations are done off-chain, which takes the pressure off of the actual network itself and allows for like very significant scaling. So it could have been presented as this kind of complicated scaling tool. It just also has the benefit of being able to preserve privacy. And there's a whole range of design decisions anyone building on top of it could take advantage of to sort of implement that. But I actually think the killer use case for zero-knowledge proofs as a layer 1 technology is stablecoins because of the actual demand for privacy on the ground. It's something that comes up. I think it was like one of the top comments in the EU when people were asked about their concern with stablecoins and CBDCs was privacy. Combined with the fact that the privacy solution is a scaling solution sort of in disguise. So there's real magic to be had there. I think what is fascinating about the space from a policy perspective is that typically there is a playbook. But if you are an issuer today, sort of thinking this through, you're making the playbook, which is, do you want to go with the whitelist approach? Pretty restrictive. Do you want to go with the blacklist approach? How do you want to do KYC? there's no one you can call who will just say, hey, here's how everyone else has done it, because it's the first time it's really happening. But I think that's, from a law and policy perspective, it makes it much more interesting than, for example, like a commercial real estate transaction in New York, where like people know how that works.
Andre, you have anything to add?
No, I think one thing I would add is it's kind of there's a blank canvas where, as a stablecoin issuer or anybody thinking of building on top of Aleo or in the future on Aztec, you can do things which haven't been done before, and design them in various creative ways. So I think while stablecoins have been kind of growing quite rapidly and will continue to grow, I think there's exponential growth to be had if you incorporate these types of systems. And I think this will unlock, one of the interesting things about Aztec, it actually started to bring traditional finance on chain. And it was, quickly became apparent that you couldn't do that on Ethereum because everything is public. So the kind of design space here is incredible. And just the tip of the iceberg has been tested.
I want to dig further into the KYC example, which is more complicated than the sanctions check. And I want to go to Sena again, basically wondering if you can explain sort of what kind of a stablecoin transaction would necessitate the need for a KYC check in addition to a sanctions check. And if you just kind of give us your general thoughts on how KYC may need to evolve, both technically and legally, in order to bring these kinds of systems to fruition.
Yeah, thanks. And I think Leslie's voice on this would be incredible to hear as well.
Yeah.
Look, when we talk about KYC, I think we have to step back and ask what we're talking about. Typically, when people reference KYC in the US, they're referencing the Bank Secrecy Act, which puts, along with its regulations, a set of requirements on financial institutions, money transmitters, and others who fall within the relevant regulatory definitions. And the basic idea here from a policy perspective, very high level, is to prevent money laundering, to prevent bad things from happening, so that the financial system cannot be used by bad guys in ways that sort of financial institutions turn a blind eye towards. So as a consumer, prior to crypto, the way you come across this is you go to open a bank account and they'll say, look, we need these 3 documents to prove who you are. And it's like, okay, your license and maybe your mortgage statement or something. And you typically go through it once and you don't really think about it again, and that's kind of it. And they know who you are, and then they can follow your transactions. And if something's showing up that requires a flag, that they'll investigate it, and hopefully that just doesn't hit your radar. In crypto, there's a different set of concerns that overlap with this, which is to say, all of a sudden, like if you go transact at Starbucks, like they're pretty confident they don't need to worry so much about where your money came from and what you're doing, right? But in crypto, since these assets can travel across the world and in enormous sums, the same sort of policy concerns are again implicated, and people are thinking through what, if any, KYC requirements need to be imposed on this entire sort of ecosystem, right? If you are a financial institution or if you're already regulated party, it already applies to you. You have to have risk mitigation. You have to comply with the KYC AML rules as they're set out, and there's a lot of discretion in that, and there's a lot of risk aversion in that, because you don't want to be seen as sort of facilitating transactions with bad guys. So depending on where you fall in the ecosystem, which is like, if you think back to what Miles was showing, like it's a meme coin transaction, it's a DeFi transaction, it's a stable coin issuance, you're going to conclude different things about how these laws apply to you.
Andre, what is your view on all this? And obviously, KYC laws and regulations vary by jurisdiction, and you're in the UK. But to your mind, are there outstanding legal questions that are worth discussing?
Yes, the answer is yes, absolutely. I think so. for example, there's Regulation 40 of the Money Laundering Regulations 2017 in the UK, for example, says that you must retain transaction records of certain copies of passports, driving licenses, and other information as part of KYC, which is applicable to regulated financial institutions. And I think the beauty of ZK is you can prove you're, for example, of a certain nationality and that you have a valid driving license, or that you reside at a certain address without actually disclosing that data. And then having, I think, a viewing key for somebody to open that kimono down the line, I think, it is not perfect. So in an ideal world, we would automate everything and we would have, proof of KYC at that point in time, where you just use a hash to prove that you've passed KYC, rather than kind of letting the information stay there and pending to be opened in a certain amount of time is not ideal. So I think, for a fully automated system, which I think would be more beneficial, in terms of cost, of compliance costs and everything, changing the laws so that a proof of KYC would satisfy these requirements would be more beneficial. And I say that not because I'm hopeful, but there's data to back up research where kind of existing kind of anti-money laundering policy intervention has less than kind of 0.1% impact on criminal finances. Compliance costs exceed recovered criminal funds more than 100 times over. It's from the University of Melbourne La Trobe research. So having that automated and not having these kind of costs of retention of data could actually transform the financial system to be more effective, more efficient, and cheaper, and cheaper not only for the regulated financial institutions but for the taxpayers.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to go to Leslie now, and just to kind of wrap this up actually and have you bring us home. The recurring theme here has been that this sort of makes a lot of technical sense, and that there are the building blocks on the technical side to put this together, and that it's almost kind of seems simple to say it's just a matter of figuring it out on the policy side. But that obviously implies a ton of work politically and otherwise legally. And so can you just kind of help us take a step back and understand some of these new and exciting ideas in the context of how policy gets made and how some of these legal things get worked out here in DC and in other capitals around the world?
Yes, I would say in terms of how the sausage gets made, there's a lot of, I would say, education that's still needed on how this technology works and is an enhancement, especially on the privacy side. It's shocking to me how many conversations we still have about the value of cash and why people prefer to use cash. So I think there's a lot more that can be done there on the education side. I will say something that's important and that we try to reinforce in our conversations with policymakers and regulators is that this is a big efficiency compared to the traditional financial system, where you have KYC at the beginning, but at every intermediary step that adds costs, it adds time, right? The fact that you could have a stablecoin transaction where it's happening at the beginning and then you have seamless movement of that stablecoin from then on is a huge improvement. You can save a lot of time, a lot of transaction costs in the process. So that, I think it's still a learning curve for us to be able to educate on that, but I'm very optimistic. And I think it's really exciting, the privacy tools that are becoming available. And I think it's less driven by what the policymakers say is clear, right? They're not coming up with the ideas. They are presented with the ideas, and then they shape the policy environment around that. So I think a lot of this will come from demand, from enterprises, from consumers, for what protections they want, and then the industry builds around that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This has been a great discussion. I hope the audience has enjoyed it. Hope everyone has learned something. I think we've taken it as far as we can today. Thank you so much to Sina, Leslie, and Andre for your thoughts. And make sure that you mark your calendars for the next meeting, which is on April 23rd. Thank you so much.